Hi, everybody. My name is Davida Herzl, and I'm CEO and co-founder of Aclima. I started the journey of building Aclima about 10 years ago to solve three integrated and really challenging problems. There are 16,000 feet of habitable air on the planet. If the Earth was an apple, the layer of breathable air would be as thick as the skin on that apple. I consider that layer of air one of the most precious resources in the universe. And when it comes to really understanding the air that we live and we breathe in, there are three integrated challenges that we set out to solve. The first one is that when it comes to climate change, it turns out that while we understand what's happening at the global level, we're actually missing the data and measurement infrastructure to understand what's happening at the local level. And so today, we don't understand two critical things. One, where are emissions coming from? And two, who are they impacting? The other critical problem that we set out to solve was this disconnection that we've sort of encountered between climate changing emissions and air pollution, because it turns out that the same emissions that are transforming our climate go straight back into our lungs. We're like fish in the ocean that have forgotten that we live in water. And those health impacts are transforming human well-being around the planet. And then the third integrated problem is that the impacts of that local pollution is not even. It's not evenly distributed. Black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by those health impacts. If you are Black in the United States, you are 3 times more likely to die from disease that is induced by exposure to pollution. And so that's what we set out to solve. How do we generate the data and the measurement infrastructure to really target solutions in a data-driven, efficient, effective way? And so the best way to show you what we've solved for is to actually show you some of our data. So this is actually the Bay Area. What I'm showing you here, the blue circles, these are the regulatory stations that are deployed across the country for compliance with the United States Clean Air Act. Those regulatory stations are sparsely distributed. Here in the Bay Area, we have one of the densest networks, but across parts of the country, you see extremely limited coverage of these sensors. Those sensors also don't measure greenhouse gases. So here we are in the face of one of the most significant issues of our time, and we are missing the infrastructure to know where those emissions are actually coming from. And so what we did over the course of the last several years was introduce an entirely new methodology and an entirely new measurement approach to fill in the gaps, to understand where air pollution and greenhouse gases are coming from, and to understand it at the block level, at that local resolution, because it turns out that pollution is hyperlocal. It can vary by up to 800% from one block to the next. And so it means that your address, where you live in proximity to those sources of emissions, can have long-standing health outcomes for you and your family and the people that we care about. We're also doing something really unique. We're measuring all of the greenhouse gases, all of the criteria pollutants, and all toxics at the same time, so that we're building this ubiquitous layer of information that can really help us understand the characterization of all of those and characterize all of the different sources in the urban environment, in the rural environment, and suburban environments across multiple kinds of environments. And because we're generating so much data all at the same time, we can take advantage of advanced data analytics and data science methodologies that help us do chemical fingerprinting, so that, for example, we can characterize the precise impacts of wildfire events, understand how that pollution is distributed, what is in that pollution. We can do signal processing on our black carbon, our PM2.5 and NO2 data to understand the precise impacts of different kinds of transportation. We're doing some really groundbreaking work right now in Southern California, looking at the impacts of expansion of warehouses as a result of e-commerce expansion over the last 2 years. We can also see, for example, we parse our methane and our VOC signals to understand, for example, the location of leaking wells. In Los Angeles, there are 10,000 abandoned wells. To understand where to target the millions of dollars that are coming into the city and into governments across the country, to target those dollars, we need information to know which ones are leaking, which ones are having an impact. And I'll talk a little bit about methane, because we're doing some really groundbreaking work here, where our data and our algorithms are being leveraged to identify the precise location of natural gas leaks. We know that at 2% leak rate, natural gas is equivalent to coal in terms of its impacts on climate change. We're seeing that those leak rates are far beyond 2%. And so we're generating the data to help as we transition to a renewable energy and a clean energy economy. We need to tamp down these emissions now. And later today, you're going to hear about the incredible work that's happening in the satellite space. EDF is doing some really groundbreaking work when it comes to methane sat. And so here, taking a closer look at these really granular the leak data that we generate. This kind of data, complemented with the kind of global coverage that methane sat and other satellites are going to provide us, will for the first time give us a completely comprehensive view of not just methane from natural gas, but methane from many different sources. Using our signal processing, we can see precisely in the urban environment, is it coming from natural gas infrastructure? Is it coming from sewage? Is it coming from landfills? This kind of ubiquity of information is absolutely critical to drive investments at the local level, and to do it in a way where we understand what problems we're targeting and how those solutions are actually generating results. And so I really talk about what we do as a data-driven operating system for climate action that has block-level community resolution, so that we can understand how those emissions are distributed and understand how they intersect with sensitive populations. All of the data that we generate streams into a software tool where we parse all of this data in real time. It's trillions and trillions of data sets that we combine with contextual data to actually understand how those emissions intersect with vulnerable populations. And so here, you're looking at a hotspot in San Jose, where our indices show that there's a sensitive population at the center of this community that needs to be prioritized for action. And so when we think about the millions and billions of dollars from the private sector, the public sector, that are streaming into climate action, we need to do this in a way that is data-driven, measurable, and we can report on the ROI and really understand, tweak, refine. We have to manage what we measure. And so this is an example of how powerful it is to have this information. So this is actually data that we generated at the beginning of the pandemic when we were initially deploying here across the Bay. In red, you can see the CO2 levels before the pandemic, before everybody went into shelter in place. And on the other side, you can see the after. And so in a matter of weeks, we were able to significantly reduce CO2 emissions. Having this kind of information, understanding where we saw those reductions, what actually had those impacts, enables us to design climate action and design investments that actually generate this ROI, both in terms of human health and in terms of climate health. The way that we do this is through the deployment, and what we pioneered is the capability to do this kind of mapping with deployed mobile monitoring fleets. So we deploy both mobile and stationary sensors. We have the world's largest mobile monitoring fleet made up of both EV and hybrid vehicles. And the other really powerful part of this model is that when we partner with a government or a utility or a company to do this kind of work, we commit to hiring from those communities that are hit hardest by pollution. And so that by investing in climate action, we're not only reducing emissions, we're lifting people up, we're lifting communities up. In New York, we launched a program where we're actually hiring previously incarcerated people, giving them an opportunity to come into the workforce and creating good paying jobs that sustain those communities and really transform those communities. And so we can truly lift people up while drawing down emissions. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody again for the opportunity to share what Aclima does, and very excited about the conversations happening here today.
Thanks, Davida.